Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dare to Care. My name is Masha, and I'm always on the lookout for new people who are passionate about animal welfare. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I asked myself again what I actually know and what I think about fish. Because it's something that, I see in the supermarket, the products of fish. I don't consume that much fish products myself, but I was thinking we produce fish, we catch them in the ocean and the sea. And I realized that I don't know that much, so that's the reason why I have now an expert with me. A warm welcome to Douglas.
Hi Masha, and hi everybody. Thanks very much for the glowing introduction there, and it's really a pleasure to come and talk with you today about the welfare of fish. And I work on the welfare of fish and other aquatic animals at an organisation called Eurogroup for Animals, which is a Brussels-based umbrella organisation of many animal advocacy groups around Europe.
Yeah, you've mentioned already the company or the work that you're doing, but maybe you can also let us know a bit about your professional background. Where do you come from? What have you studied maybe?
Sure, yeah, and it's a slightly indirect path I've taken to this point, and I suppose it started after my studies were actually in politics and economics of international development, and I then did some work on academic projects that were looking at aquaculture production in Asia and in Africa, and partly for export to Europe and partly for local consumption. And I really focused on sort of the environmental and ethical issues, especially there, and including the welfare of fish. So this was sort of 10 years ago when I first did some sort of mini projects on the welfare of fish and how some aquaculture producers were sort of paying attention and others weren't. And that was my sort of start on the topic, and from there took a sort of NGO path, and I've been sort of gaining knowledge from others around me all the way, but I didn't start off with an animal focused or very technical study.
Okay. And then welfare of animals, when did that start?
For me, it was when I was attached to these aquaculture products and discovered that animal welfare in aquaculture was a thing. Of course, had awareness of animal welfare issues my whole life, but I started to take a bigger focus on it when I discovered it was this sort of huge knowledge gap and barely recognised issue in aquaculture. That was what sort of picked up my attention.
So you've been in that animal welfare sphere for now quite a bit. I'm always wondering, people who have been there for a couple of years now, how it feels now to still be in that sphere and in that field. Has it changed animal welfare approach in general or for yourself personally?
Maybe what's changing for me on the topic, specifically on the aquatics and fish topic, or what feels different has been a very new topic. It's been emergent, and say 10 years ago, many people would maybe not have acknowledged or recognized the issue. And in those sort of 10 years, the topic has come so far. It's now quite widely recognized. There's labeling initiatives, there's legislation and policy initiatives. And so the pace of momentum and change and sense of progress over the last years has been really significant and noticeable. And now that sort of recognition is there, and there's serious efforts to make substantive changes, the progress can really slow down. And it feels, and then fish have arrived maybe where unfortunately too many other animals are, there are lots of problems that we are now recognise, but have, for various technical and social and economic reasons, have a really hard time making progress on. So it's maybe the topic and my experience are a bit in transition from fast pace of progress and recognition to now at a place where impact can potentially be really high and progress is hard.
Yeah, it's always interesting to maybe see the bigger picture than to know a bit of the history, or what has happened in the past in regard to animal welfare. and to be part of change also. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, then maybe going back to like our topic, fish, fish welfare. Maybe you can explain a little bit what fish welfare actually means, especially when we talk about like the wild capture fisheries.
Sure. I mean, a definition of fish welfare would be the same as a definition of any animal welfare. It's the experience of the animal and the mental state of the animal and the quality of life that they have, which, of course, we pursue animals having a good quality of life, which means having lots of good experiences as well as challenges and some difficult experiences. And, unfortunately, it all too often means working in situations where people are causing a lot of suffering to animals and trying to reduce the suffering. And in wild capture fisheries, the context there, so it's quite a unique sector or animal-based activity in that it is an extractive industry taking huge numbers of wild animals into the food chain, and that animal lives a wild life in the wild, free of direct human intervention. Although humans have done a lot to alter their environment, and the availability of food for them is not what it was in a degraded ocean environment, and with climate change and rising water temperatures, that means the oxygen in the water is less available to the fish. So they have a wildlife in this human degraded environment, but then it's at the time that we capture them and kill them that they really have a particularly bad time and unpleasant end to life. With a lot, we'll come on to it, I'm sure, but there's quite a wide range of fishing methods used. Some of them, most of them take several hours or can be several days of the nets in the water, during which time all kinds of beyond challenges, fish chased to exhaustion and crushed in nets and exposed to predators, unable to escape, that sort of, all kinds of long-lasting impacts. And then when they're brought onto the boat, people's attention hasn't been on welfare in fisheries, so there's procedures have not been designed to make handling gentle, minimise time out of water, and maybe it's emergent, but it's very rare that there would be effective stunning at slaughter or even a killing method applied there. Most fish are just asphyxiated. So that's a little picture of the situation in fisheries.
Yeah. So you mentioned now you kind of described the scenery for like wild capture, and you mentioned already stunning, and that's something I think, as far as I know, and I said in the beginning I'm not very knowledgeable about this topic, but especially stunning is one of the differences when you compare like wild capture and then maybe like if you see a fisherman alongside the river and then capture like 2 fish a day or something. But we also have like aquaculture. Can you like mention a few major differences in how we keep the animals and also how we then catch them in the end and kill them?
Just this year, the statistics on where fish come from sort of crossed a line globally, and now more than half of the aquatic animals, mostly fish, that are consumed are farmed fish. And that has been increasing steadily for the last 20 or so years or more. It's really a growing sector, aquaculture. This is global figures, and fisheries have really been flatlining for sort of 20 years on that level, where we've been extracting as many fish as we can from the sea, and there's no more to come. So, and you see that shift in our supermarket shelves over the last 10, 20 years, that there's increasingly more and more farmed fish and farmed shrimp on the shelves, and still many wild caught fish as well. And they're often not clearly differentiated. It would be up to the consumer to know something about a species or a label or something if they were going to try and understand or know what was being offered to them. And then for farmed fish, there's many similarities to farmed terrestrial animals. They'll start life in a hatchery where I'm going to emphasize an area of difference with many farmed fish from farmed terrestrial animals, and that is how long they live. And a farmed salmon is probably 4 to 5 years old before it is harvested and brought to market, compared to a chicken at 39 days. So those two, that brings in a whole load of factors in their life experience. And so farmed fish will start in a hatchery where your broodstock, parent animals, as part of often a breeding program, produce eggs, and those broodstock can certainly be over 5 years old, certainly 10, 15-year-old broodstock. And so you can have a very large size and mature fish living an extremely long life in a relatively very small tank, usually, or a cage. And eggs are often manually collected by taking the fish out of water and pushing physically with their thumbs, pushing they might say stroking the belly, but I will say pushing the eggs out of the fish. And then young fish are extremely vulnerable. The environment in the hatchery has a big effect on their growth and survival, and as does what they've been selected for. And we're seeing a lot of heart problems resulting now from fast-growing fish, and most salmon are deaf because they've been selected to grow so fast that their ears actually don't work. Getting off to often not the greatest start, and we know that stressors at egg stage and stressors at juvenile stage impact that fish's ability to cope with stress through its whole life. So they start off very delicately, and maybe uniquely in aquaculture, it's common practice in many, but not every situation, to do chemical stress tests, as you might call it, and to cull basically the significant portion of the weaker fish at hatchery stage, and then from those that survive through, they will then be live transported onto a grow out farm, and that could be a cage in the sea, it could be a pond in a field, it could be a concrete raceway, we call it, a sort of a more advanced form of pond, it could be a tank in a building somewhere, and then they will grow on there depending on the species and market size and things, maybe a year, maybe 2-3 years. An extreme scenario would be sturgeon that are farmed to produce caviar when they will be 20 years old before they're producing eggs, so there will be 20 years in a pond. And the challenges, there's handling, nutrition, environmental control of water quality, and that's before we even get into trying to provide enrichment for these fish. And so there's many, many, many factors and issues, and you can really draw a connection with what we're familiar with, or more familiar with, in terrestrial animals. But another difference to highlight is that fish are not domesticated species. We farmed carp for maybe 5,000 years, and trout in Europe also for 200 plus years. And then every other species that we have on our shelves is 20, up to 20, salmon, maybe 30 years. We've had these species in captivity, and they are not domesticated. We don't know what their basic needs are. We don't really know how to look after them, but we've been experimenting away with keeping them in captivity with very high mortality rates and trying to harvest enough to make a profit. Mortality rates aren't really published in aquaculture, but where they are published, in, for example, Norway or the UK, it's sort of 15 to 20% during the grow out phase or die before harvest, and it looks like it's the same at hatchery stage. So sort of 40% mortality is much higher than I've seen in any terrestrial systems. And then the wild caught fish, I will much more shortly say that, they have a wild life until they're caught, and then, the capture is just horrendous.
Well, it's crazy. Like, again, I realize like how little I know. I also haven't I haven't visited an aquaculture or like anything like. It's like the very same system that we have with chicken. So it's interesting for me to see like the similarities here in production. And then maybe like actually going a bit more deeper into like the ethical consideration. I, as a vet, I've learned quite a lot about terrestrial animals, like farm animals. And also I had a lecture that was called Animal Welfare, and we were focusing 100%, maybe like 95% on terrestrial animals. Well, it's kind of an obvious question, or like the answer is obvious, but do you think that, like, given say that we are given as we, the public, give the same ethical consideration as land animals when it comes to welfare, or do we differentiate?
Well, we recently published a survey in looking at European attitudes on this, and we found very strong results that people think that aquatic animals should have the same protections as terrestrial animals. But and I think they've become increasingly prominent in communications and in reporting in the last years, and so I feel that they do. They have recently come to get the same level of recognition, or they're getting there. Veterinary course, then it's quite a specific environment, and there's a lot of diversity in aquaculture. The species are all different from each other, and so I will say two conflicting things. One is that there's loads and loads of knowledge on this, but then the other thing is that there's absolutely not very much knowledge for each species, and it's not comprehensive for each species. Okay. And so to train to veterinary level, and there's less knowledge per species available than there is for terrestrial animals, for sure. But having said that, there are aquatic vet specific courses at a very few universities available that are close to major aquaculture industries, and then they'll focus on the local species, and they'll use a lot of learned experience as well as published knowledge. But I went a bit knowledgey there rather than ethical. Prompt me with another question on more ethics, if you like.
So you already mentioned this knowledge gap, or like research gap, on just the variety of species that we have in regard to like fish or like aquatic species. I mean, I guess then we just, in quotation, we just need time for like research to happen to be then able to like also promote better welfare standards, because then veterinarians, but also the people who are managing those aquacultures, they know better what to do and how to keep the fish not only alive, but maybe also to like provide a kind of better life. Would you say just let's wait and see, because we need time for that to happen?
More knowledge can be applied and improve things for sure. I'm not overly optimistic on that path, and I think of aquaculture, coming back to it being a very new sector, and really technology and systems have been developed over the last 20 years. And then we start developing knowledge within those systems and relevant to those systems, and within the limitations of what's practical in those systems. And if we look at something like an intensive aquaculture production system, the technology has become so established that it will be very limited what is possible to achieve in that kind of environment. Thinking about a sea cage or a land-based tank, where the investment in technology demands very, very high production rates. And I think that welfare, it should now become central focus. We've got these undomesticated animals, and it would only make sense to put their needs at the centre of developing this technology around them. But when instead the process has been to develop the technology, and we'll come and see if we can tweak it at the edges later, and that's just always going to be a really limited approach. And this our first sort of conscious domestication of a farm species, I'm not sure if I'm going too far by saying that, but in the last 20 years and starting now, it should be a much more dramatic focus on the needs of the fish at the centre, developing other things and sort of incremental development of knowledge and improvements around that. But it needs to be far more central.
Yeah, and beside that, when you have also this 3R rule that you apply for research, like animals being used in research. I think it can also being applied to like farm animals, so to reduce the numbers, and by that you reduce like the amount of suffering. It's just like another way to of what to do.
Yeah, it would be great. Aquaculture again has some unique features in the number of fish used. In salmon aquaculture, they are increasingly using a couple of species of fish, some wrasse and lumpfish they're called, and they call them cleaner fish because they believe that they eat the sea lice. The evidence on it is quite poor, but they're using it as a predator control measure, and they'll for every 5 salmon, there's probably 1 of these fish in the cage, and they have many of them die early or they end up in the slaughter system, and there's no good outcomes for these fish. So there's just extra fish in the system there. And then another unique feature of aquaculture is most fish, and especially most farmed fish species, are carnivorous. And carnivores are hungry and eat lots of animals. And so feeding them is very demanding on wild fish stocks that aren't there. And especially becoming problematic in Europe, that we're taking fish off the west coast of Africa and leaving the fishing communities there without fish to catch. And there's been research to try to reduce that animal content, and expensive animal content in the feeds, and then it gets replaced with soy, or they're trying to replace it with insects. But to produce a sort of meat quality protein product out of soy, you need to get a large amount of soy and put a lot of resources into refining it, and so it's very demanding on soy production that is also not good for biodiversity. And so reducing the number of fish put into fish meal, and reducing the use of cleaner fish before you even ask anybody, or to reduce the amount of fish they eat, and then we could get on to reducing the amount of fish people eat. It's a huge issue, and the number of animals is incredible. There's around 2 billion fish in fish farms in Europe just now, and globally it's check the numbers, many billions. With wild fish, it's way in the trillions, and you can see there's a fishcount.org.uk website where they've estimated the numbers of fish in different situations.
Yeah, I think that's also something that the consumer not always realizes. That it's one thing, I think, because the contact to fish is like you go to a supermarket and you want to buy it and eat it. But then to imagine the numbers of fish that have gone into that one that you are eating, I think that's something that doesn't really click, or that. I think that's hard to understand. It's quite abstract also.
I'd say there's been a very successful work at making that very unclear to people, and it's a very well sort of known problem. But when the policymakers or industry initiatives or labeling schemes have worked on it, they've not managed to come out with meaningful measures and indicators. That it's every time obfuscated and kept out of sight.
Yeah, I think I would like to discuss the different fishing methods that we find in wild capture, because at least in Europe we have different labels on the package and so on, and if you then know what it means, you're lucky. But maybe you can explain to us the differences, and then for each single one the impact also on the fish welfare.
Yes, sure. I'll go through some of these, and these are the categories used on the European labels are quite overarching. So there's different versions within them, but one of them is trawling, and that is having a big net hanging out the back of your boat, and you drive the boat along and you pull the net through the water, and it captures fish as you go. And that can be within the water, or it can be across the bottom, and that is commonly causing problems, including those fish will enter the net, and then they will try to swim out and keep up with it, but it'll be too fast for them, so they will swim until they're exhausted, and then once they're physically exhausted, they'll float and fall into the back of the net, and they collect there, so they are crushed in the back of the net and will pick up injuries. And then when they're brought up onto the boat, depending how deep they've been, they can have decompression injuries that. And they also can experience changing water temperatures as they're brought up up to the boat. There's a version of bottom trawling called beam trawling, where a heavy beam is across the front of the net and it keeps it on the bottom, and but that will injure the fish, as it's not used to catch flatfish, and it will sort of rip the scales off and pull fins off and things as they're caught and as they enter the net. One of the other main methods is seine nets, or sometimes called surrounding nets, and then a boat will travel around a school of fish and encircle them, and it will put a net all around them, and then it can close the bottom, and then it's got those fish, and then they will close the net in and tighten the space that the fish are in, and then those fish will be either use a smaller net or potentially a pump with pipes to bring those fish onto the boat. And they experience a lot of stress in that crowding process when they're being brought, and they will be making, as we say, vigorous escape attempts, and the water will look like it's boiling, and the fish are absolutely in frantic panic, and until the oxygen levels drop, and then these fish are suffocating in the water. Large fish caught like this are brought on board using something called a gaff hook, and it is a big metal hook, and they will somebody holding it will lean over the boat and stick it into the fish behind its operculum, behind its cheek where its gills are, and that will cause a horrific injury, and then the fish will get hauled around and just pulled around alive like that. Another method is hanging nets, or sometimes called drift nets or fixed or set nets, and then it's if you can think of basically a wall of netting that is suspended in the water, and it could be quite near the surface, or it could be quite near the bottom, and it could potentially be really quite long. That will be left in the water for potentially several days, and so a fish will swim into it, and it will get caught in it, and then it will suffocate or starve probably. Fish generally need to, well, it varies between species, but a lot of fish need to keep moving to breathe, or they need to keep the water flowing over their gills to breathe, and if they can't move or they've been injured around the head, then there's a good chance they won't be able to breathe. But they may not die fast. They will just be stuck there for potentially several days, suffering. They will be exposed to predators and unable to escape. It's common that fish are predated on while caught in these nets. And if it's from deep down again, they can have the pressure change problems, and then they have to be removed from the net, which is often a very rough procedure, and they may well be alive when they come onto the boat.
So how the fish most of the times die is like by lack of oxygen or by just pressure of the other fish, or is there like a proper killing method? Because with terrestrial farm animals, it's like you have to stun them, you have to like let them bleed out. So is there like any regulation on like the killing method for fish?
No, there is not. It's coming in aquaculture. There is in some places. For example, in Norway, fish have to be stunned. In Germany, fish have to be stunned. There are other countries too. For wild caught fish, there's very few examples of regulations made for the welfare of wild caught fish anywhere. There is in the Netherlands, wild eel have to be stunned electrically before slaughter. And
do you then do that like individually or with a group of like with several animals?
Yeah, right. So like there's a device which is a kind of basin or bucket or box, and you put batch, you put a small number, but a batch of eels into it, and then they can and there's water in there, and they're electrically stunned. In New Zealand, they extended rules that if you catch wild fish and then keep them alive to market and keep them alive to the point of sale, then you must stun them. But otherwise there's not regulations on it. There's an emergent trend that wild capture boats will stun fish, and there's different examples of this in different situations. There is a cod company in North America that uses another method, long line. They have a very long line of hooks that can be out for days, or I'm not sure how long they specifically put theirs out for, but they electrically stun those when they bring them in. And I understand increasingly trawlers in Norway have electrical stunners on them, and it's because they're handling very large sized fish, and it's a health hazard to the workers on the boats that are handling a large fish that is very difficult to manipulate or keep a hold of, and is moving around. And so they are stunning them to immobilize them. But they are probably not, delivering what we would say an effective stun. They're not causing unconsciousness in less than a second. But we can say it's progress, that the equipment is there and being adapted to the environment of a fishing boat, and it will be and there are researchers working on establishing the right parameters for these species, and so there's signs that this can come. But as you said, many fish die before they get on the boat, and this is something that we don't have a lot of information on. There's very little data on this, but there was a paper published in just a couple of months ago, which is the Danish pelagic open water fisheries got involved in a project to see what they could do about improving welfare, and they found that was a seine nets catching herring, I remember, and 95 or 96% of those fish were dead when they arrived at the boat. And from that, they've examined the injuries they had and identified where else they can look to try to make improvements. But then for example, Dutch trawler catching flatfish, most of those fish will be very visibly alive when they come on board the boat. And so there's huge variety out there.
Yeah, it's interesting again that it's hard to get a picture globally, because each country, each nation has different regulations and policies on that. So even within the EU, we have different laws, animal welfare laws and standards in regard to that. Is that correct?
So I would say at the EU level and by the EU, there's no rules, but then there are some countries that have produced their own, right? Yeah. Okay. So, and in aquaculture, yes. In wild capture fisheries, really not yet. But the EU has been it's being a little unclear about its political priorities at the moment, and maybe clearer by the year end. But they were working on introducing. They've done a lot of work over the last 4 years to develop fish welfare legislation, and in fact, it's been written and is in a on-hold scenario after elections and defining new work programs. But we're anticipating progress on that in the next few years. And yeah, not really rules on wild capture, but it is now being recognised in documents that are revising the EU's common fisheries policy, and that could be the start of more focus on it.
Mm-hmm. So when then maybe going from the killing or the capturing to the handling, you said that I think it was Norway, right, where they had this huge fish, and it was quite dangerous also for the people working on the boats handling those fish. I don't really know how the work process, how the workflow looks like on a boat. How do people handle the fish? Can you maybe describe it a bit?
Yeah, well, again, great variety on different boats and with different types of nets, the fish and how, so they might have a net might come in and they might tip all the fish into a big sort of bucket and then process them from there. And the fish coming over a sort of table where there's workers, maybe size grading, maybe gutting the fish, and then from there they'll get it into a box of ice, and that'll get stacked in a sort of fridge. And I've seen video of a electrical stunner operating on a cod boat in Norway, and large fish were coming in sort of through a hatch, and I'm not sure what had happened before the hatch, but they were coming in a hatch onto a sort of conveyor belt, and then they're stunned on the conveyor belt as they travel sort of through an area that has electrodes hanging down, and then they're again on a table, and a worker can handle the fish and then onto a box of ice. And on some boats, and flatfish live on the bottom, and they don't need much. They can sort of be alive without very much oxygen, which means they won't die fast when you take them take them out of the water. Although they're not able to breathe, they live a long time, and they could be on that through that whole process in a box of ice in the fridge and still alive for 10 more hours in that box in the fridge.
Okay. So there's not, because I've been only in a slaughterhouse, also specifically in a German slaughterhouse, for like pigs and like big ruminants, so like cows. And their veterinarian has to be there, stand there and check like every single animal to be like properly stunned and killed, and to make sure that this is done correct. So as far as I understand, and I think I've never heard of a veterinarian being on a boat and checking how the fish has been killed, there is no like control point that then makes sure that the fish at least at some point is finally dead.
No, you're right. In EU law, somewhere where fish are commercially killed is not defined as a slaughterhouse, and therefore all requirements for slaughterhouses are not applied or implemented in anywhere that's killing and processing fish, aquaculture fish, or on a wild capture boat. Germany is different. It has domestic legislation that farmed fish must be stunned, but no requirement for a veterinarian or to be present. And then and wild capture, as you were touching on earlier, has been so out of people's minds that just the thought that this could apply there, I think, never crossed anybody's mind, but it definitely has now.
Yeah. I think it would be interesting to learn also something about bycatch, because I think that's something that also the public is usually quite interested in, especially when it sees like these horrific pictures of like dolphins or like aquatic animals that we find cute and that then people start to pay attention to, because it is often a result in it is an unintended capture and then also a death of the non-target species. I know there are like some regulations about, for example, the size of the holes of the net. Are there like other rules, guidelines, how to reduce the numbers of bycatch?
Yes, it's not my specific area of expertise, but there's limitations. Yeah, there's a lot of technical rules about how different fishing nets and methods can be used, and especially there's been quite a lot of work to manufacture gear that is selective fishing gear, so that I'm being fish obsessed. I think of target fish species before turtles and mammals and things, and that's probably the largest number of bycatch. But there's quite a variety of systems available, and they're normally designed for a very specific location where there is a very specific mix of species, and depending how the different species behave, they will design netting that means, some fish, when they get scared, they'll swim up the way and then they make holes in the top, and some fish they want to catch, and they learn about the behavior of the fish, and then we'll design nets that some are in and some are out, and they more of that would be much welcome. They need to move away from using fish aggregating devices, as they're known, which is a floating something or other. It doesn't really matter. It creates shade in the ocean, and then fish gather around it, and that's the fish the fishermen want to catch. But because there's lots of fish there's lots of predators there eating the fish. So, yeah, there's some really obvious practices that keep always resulting in bycatch that should be moved away from.
Okay, I think we're coming to an end. We've talked for quite a bit already. It's always nice to end the conversation with something positive that you can look forward to. You said that you have seen over the last 10 years definitely improvement in animal welfare and the approach and so on. Are there steps in coming years, some promising trends or initiatives also that you've heard of and that you maybe could tell us?
Yes, there is a few notes of optimism.
Thank God.
yeah. Well, so I've touched on stunners being sort of emergent already, and now with recognition and some sort of attention arriving, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in designing equipment and procedures on boats to reduce the time out of water and introduce faster killing methods. We don't need technical knowledge so much to achieve that. We just need to bring that sort of mindset to design and layout of equipment and procedures on a boat. And then I'll highlight a couple. But before I do, my area is, especially work on policy, and so there's more recognition at EU level of this issue, and they're looking over the next few years at updating the common fisheries policy, and it's now on the agenda, and that's not going to mean immediately rules, but it can mean more research and hopefully market mechanisms to reward better practices and early movers. And there's two particular research projects that are setting out and developing a lot of knowledge on this. And one of them is called the Carefish Project, and you can find it at carefish.net. And that's a research group that are working on defining welfare issues and interventions that are possible in wild capture fisheries. And there's another one called Catch Welfare Platform in catchwelfareplatform.com, and that is a group of researchers and businesses and others setting out on this path of developing scientific knowledge and scientifically based technologies and interventions that could be done.
Cool. I mean, that's good to know that there is research being done, policies in the coming. Yeah, we are just here in Germany, we're now kind of updating our animal welfare law, and it's a big discussion as well. So yeah, it's always good to see that on different levels people are working on topics and promoting better welfare standards in general.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing the outcome of that. Germany, I say it's a leader. It's maybe the only country in Europe that has, in the EU, with fish welfare rules during the farming phase, and it has that slaughter requirement and transport rules, and so it'll be great to see that updated.
Okay, well then, thanks for letting us know also about the different websites. I will definitely put them in the description below so people can have a look.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, if you put our report up, that would be great as well. And
yeah. So for the people out there, so in preparation for that, I've read the report that Douglas just mentioned, and it's first of all, it's quite comprehensive. It's a few pages to read through, but there are a lot of insights, a lot of numbers also. So I can just recommend reading this as well. Is there anything else left that you would like to share or tell us? I don't know, some hints and tips maybe, either for consumers, for veterinarians, for anyone who is somehow involved in fish?
That's a big question.
I know.
A message for veterinarians that you have you play a really important role, and you are in a sometimes difficult situation where you're serving animals and you're also serving businesses. And so my message is, put the animal first and put the needs of the animal first and the product after.
That's very true. Yeah, thank you for that. Well then, thank you very, very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much for the discussion. It's been great to discuss the topic with you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
and it's over again. I hope you have learned something new or have been inspired. If so, please share it with someone you know, and by that let's make the world together a little wiser. Take the time to give us 5 stars and a good review. If you would like to know more about today's topic, like always, you'll find a bunch of links in the description. If you have any questions, want to know more about the podcast, or have any other comments, just write an email at podcast.daretocare@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram at daretocare_podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.